What would you do if you waited months for a mail-order bride, only to see a child step off that dusty train in 1887? Would you turn away? Or would you discover that sometimes God sends exactly what you need, not what you want? The scorching summer of 1887 had been merciless to the folks of Willow Creek, Montana Territory. Dust devils danced across the barren landscape like spirits off the damned, and the sun beat down with the fury of an angry God. Ezekiel Thompson stood on the weathered platform of the tiny train station, his callous hands gripping a crumpled telegram. The paper had been read so many times that the ink was starting to fade, but he knew the words by heart. Arriving Tuesday train, ready to marry M. Whitmore. Today was Tuesday. The train was due any minute now. Ezekiel adjusted his Warnston and wiped the sweat from his brow with a faded bandana. At 34, he was still a fine-looking man, tall and broad, shouldered from years of hard ranch work. His dark hair was beginning to show touches of silver at the temples, and worry lines had etched themselves around his green eyes. Thompson Ranch had been struggling for 3 years now, ever since the terrible winter that killed most of his cattle and took his beloved wife Priscilla from pneumonia. He had tried to manage alone, but a man couldn't run a ranch and tend to all the domestic needs by himself. The loneliness was eating him alive, and work was becoming too much. That's when his neighbor, old Henrik Larson, had suggested the idea of a mail-order bride. Lots of good women back east looking for husbands. Henrik had said, stroking his gray beard. My cousin Magnus found his wife that way. Been married 15 years now, got 5 young ones. The idea had seemed sensible enough. Ezekiel had placed an advertisement in several eastern newspapers. Widowed rancher in Montana Territory seeks respectable woman for marriage and companionship. Must be hardworking and willing to assist with domestic duties. Serious inquiries only. He had received several responses, but Millicent Whitmore's letter had stood out. She wrote with a neat, careful hand, and spoke of her desire for a quiet life away from the crowded cities. She mentioned being 26 years old, experienced in cooking and sewing, and ready to start fresh in the Western Territories. She seemed perfect. The distant whistle of the approaching train broke through his thoughts. A plume of black smoke appeared on the horizon, growing larger as the iron horse chugged toward Willow Creek. Ezekiel's heart began to race. In just a few minutes, he would meet the woman who would become his wife, the woman who would help him save his ranch and maybe even heal his broken heart. The train pulled into the station with a great hiss of steam and screech of brakes. Ezekiel stepped forward, his eyes scanning the passenger car windows. The conductor, a stout man named Jeremiah Pike, hopped down and began helping passengers disembark. First came Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, returning from visiting her sister in Denver. Then came traveling salesman Barnaby Walsh with his sample cases. A few other familiar faces followed, but no sign of Millicent Whitmore. Ezekiel's palms grew sweaty. Maybe she had misled the train. Maybe she had changed her mind. Maybe this whole idea had been foolish from the start. Then the conductor reached up to help someone else down from the train. Ezekiel craned his neck to see, expecting to catch his first glimpse of his bride-to-be. Instead, a small girl stepped onto the platform. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old, with honey-colored hair braided neatly down her back, and wearing a simple blue dress that had seen better days. She carried a worn carpet bag that looked almost too heavy for a small frame, and her wide brown eyes darted nervously around the platform. Ezekiel blinked hard, certain he was seeing things. The heat must be getting to him. But when he looked again, the child was still there, standing alone on the platform as the other passengers dispersed. "Excuse me, sir," came a small, clear voice. The girl had approached him and was looking up with those enormous brown eyes. "Are you Murdoch Ezekiel Thompson?" For a moment, Ezekiel couldn't find his voice. Yes, I am. But who are you, child?" "I'm Magnolia Whitmore," she said, extending a tiny hand with surprising formality. "But most folks call me Maggie. I believe y'all were expecting me." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Ezekiel stared down at the girl, his mind struggling to process what was happening. There must be some mistake. "I was expecting that as I arranged for a wife," Maggie finished materially. "Yes, sir, I know. My Aunt Millicent was supposed to come, but she took sick with consumption 3 weeks ago. She passed on last Sunday. The words hit Ezekiel like a physical blow. Your aunt? Yes, sir. She was all the family I had left after Ma and Pa died in the fever last spring. Before she passed, Aunt Millicent Madam promised to come in her place. She said you seemed like a good man from your letters, and that maybe you could use some help around your ranch, even if it wasn't the kind you were expecting. Ezekiel looked around the platform desperately, as if another adult might materialize to claim this child. But they were alone now except for Jeremiah Pike, who was preparing the train for departure. Child, Ezekiel said carefully. I can't possibly. I was expecting a grown woman too. This is no place for a little girl. Maggie's chin lifted with a dignity that seemed for beyond her years. Begging your pardon, Mr. Thompson, but I've been taking care of myself and Aunt Millicent for months now. I can cook and clean and mend clothes. I'm stronger than I look and I'm not afraid of hard work. The train whistled blew, signaling departure. Conductor Pike approached them, tipping his cap to Ezekiel. Everything all right here, Thompson? This little one belonged to you. Ezekiel looked down at Maggie, who was watching him with a mixture of hope and defiance. Her small hands gripped the handle off her carpet bag so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. Everything about her posture suggested she was prepared for rejection, but determined to face it with dignity. Before we begin, we'd love for you to watch the story closely and by the end rate it out of 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us understand the kind of stories you enjoy, and it guides us in creating even better content for you. Ezekiel began, then stopped. What choice did he have? He couldn't put a 10-year-old girl back on the train to nowhere. And despite Hishik, something about her straightforward manner and obvious courage touched a chord deep in his chest. Yes, he heard himself saying, yes, she's with me. Pike nodded and climbed back aboard. Within minutes, the train was pulling away from the station, leaving Ezekiel alone with his unexpected ward. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the dust from third-parting trains settling around them. Finally, Maggie spoke. I know this ain't what you planned, Mr. Thompson. If you want to send me on to the next town, I'll understand, but I promise you won't regret keeping me around. I'll earn my keep. There was something heartbreaking about the way she said it. The small girl trying so hard to be brave and practical. Ezekiel found himself thinking of his late wife Priscilla and how she had always wanted children. They had tried for years, but it had never happened. Maybe this was Providence working in mysterious ways. Well, Hesed, finally, I reckon we'd better get you home then. It's a fair ride to the ranch. Relief flickered across Maggie's face, though she tried to hide it. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Ezekiel led her to his wagon, hitched to the sturdy horses named Thunder and Lightning. He helped her up onto the wooden seat and loaded her carpet bag in the back. As they set off down the dusty road that led to his ranch, he stole glances at his unexpected passenger. Tell me about yourself, Maggie, he said as they addled along the rutted path. Where did you come from? Philadelphia, she replied, sitting up straight despite the jolting of the wagon. MP ran a boarding house there until they took sick. After they passed, I went to live with Aunt Millicent. She worked as a seamstress, but the consumption made her too weak to work much toward the end. And you took care of her? Yes, sir. I learned to cook and clean out of necessity. Aunt Millicent taught me to sew real fine, too. She said, a woman should always have skills to fall back on. Ezekiel nodded, impressed despite himself. How old are you, child? I'll be 11 come October, Maggie said. I know I'm small for my age, but I'm hearty. Never been sick a day in my life. They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Thinly sounds the clip-clop of hooves and the creak of wagon wheels. The landscape stretched endlessly round them, golden grassland and dotted with sagebrush and the occasional cottonwood tree. In the distance, the Rocky Mountains rose like ancient guardians against the sky. It's mighty big out here, Maggie observed, her eyes wide as she took it all in. That it is, Ezekiel agreed. Take some getting used to. If you're accustomed to city life, you might find it lonesome. I don't mind lonesome, Maggie said quietly. Been lonesome most of my life anyway. Something in her tone made Ezekiel's chest tight. This little girl had faced more hardship in her short life than many adults ever would. He found himself wanting to protect her, to give her the childhood she deserved. As they crested a small hill, the Thompson Ranch came into view. It wasn't much to look at. A modest farmhouse with a wraparound porch, a barn that needed new paint, and a few outbuildings scattered around the property. The land stretched for acres in every direction, much of it lying now due to lack of cattle, and help to work it. "That's 'em," Ezekiel said, pointing toward the buildings. Maggie studied the ranch with the same serious expression she seemed to wear for everything. "It looks like a good place," she said finally. "Peaceful. It used to be prosperous, too," Ezekiel admitted before the hard times hit. "I'm hoping to build it back up again. I'll help however I can," Maggie promised sullenly. As they pulled up to the house, Ezekiel felt a strange mixture of apprehension and hope. His plan to find a wife had certainly not worked out as expected. But maybe, just maybe, this unexpected turn of events would prove to be a blessing in disguise. He helped Maggie down from the wagon and carried her carpet bag to the front porch. The house had been closed up most of the day, and it felt stuffy and warm inside. Ezekiel opened windows to let in some air while Maggie stood in the center of the front room, taking everything in. The house was clean but sparse, furnished with only the necessities. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a few chairs arranged around it. The kitchen was visible through an open doorway and stairs led up to the second floor. "It's real nice," Maggie said politely. "Much nicer than the tenement where Aunt Millicent and I lived. I'm afraid it's not much decorated," Ezekiel said, suddenly seeing the place through a child's eyes. "My wife Priscilla, she had a way with making things homey. I haven't had the heart to change much since she passed." "How long ago did she die?" Maggie asked gently. 3 years this past winter." Ezekiel's voice was quiet. "She caught pneumonia during a particularly bad storm. Doc couldn't get out to us in time." "I'm sorry," Maggie said, and her sympathy seemed genuine. "Losing folks you love is the hardest thing in the world." "Yes, it is." Ezekiel cleared his throat. "Well, let me show you where you'll be staying. There's a spare room upstairs that should suit you fine." He led her up the narrow staircase to a small but cheerful room at the back of the house. It contained a simple iron bed, a chest of drawers, and a wash stand with a pitcher and basin. Thundo looked out over the back pasture toward the mountains. "This was going to be," Ezekiel began, then stopped himself. He had been about to say it was going to be a nursery, the room where he and Priscilla had planned to put their children. "Well, it's yours now." Maggie set her carpet bag on the bed and looked around with obvious pleasure. "It's perfect, Mr. Thompson. Thank you. You can call me Ezekiel if you like, or Zeke. Most folks do." "I'd be honored to, sir." "I mean Zeke." They went back downstairs, and Ezekiel showed her the rest of the house. The kitchen with its wood-burning stove and hand pump at the sink. The small pantry. The root cellar where they stored vegetables and preserved foods. "I'm afraid I'm not much of a cook," Ezekiel admitted. "I've been getting by on beans and heart attack mostly." Maggie looked horrified. "That is no way to eat. A man needs proper meals to keep up his strength. If you've got supplies, I can fix us something decent for supper." "I've got some salt, pork, and potatoes," Ezekiel offered. "Some canned tomatoes and a bit of flour." "That'll do fine," Maggie said, rolling up her sleeves. "You just sit yourself down and let me handle this." Despite his protests that she must be tired from her journey, Maggie insisted on cooking. Ezekiel sat at the kitchen table and watched in amazement as the small girl moved around his kitchen with the efficiency of someone twice her age. She sliced potatoes with quick, sure strokes, seasoned salt pork, and soon had a delicious-smelling meal sizzling on the stove. "Where did you learn to cook like that?" he asked. "Like I said, necessity is a fine teacher," Maggie replied, stirring the potatoes. "When Aunt Millicent got too weak to manage, it was either learn quick or go hungry. He chose to learn." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they sat down to the best meal Ezekiel had eaten in months. The salt pork was perfectly seasoned. The potatoes were golden and crispy, and Maggie had even managed to whip up some biscuits from the flour. "This is delicious, Maggie," Ezekiel said, meaning every word. "I can't remember the last time I had a proper home-cooked meal." Maggie beamed with pride. "Aunt Millicent always said, the way to show folks you care is through good food. After supper, they sat on the front porch as the evening cooled down. The vastness of the western sky was beginning to fill with stars. More stars than Maggie had ever seen in the city. "Z," she said quietly, "I want you to know how grateful I am that you didn't send me away today. I know this wasn't what you planned." "No, it wasn't," Ezekiel admitted. "But I'm starting to think maybe it's what I needed instead of what I planned. I meant what I said about earning my keep. I can cook and clean and mend clothes. I can tend a garden if you've got seeds. And I'm real good with numbers. I kept all of Aunt Millicent's accounts. I believe you can do all those things," Ezekiel said. "But Maggie, you're still just a child. You deserve to have some fun to play and learn and not worry about adult concerns all the time." Maggie was quiet for a long moment. "You haven't been a child for a long time, Zeke, not since Ma and Pa got sick. But maybe here I could remember how to be one, at least sometimes." Something in her wistful tone made Ezekiel's heart ache. This little girl had been forced to grow up too fast, to shoulder burdens that should have belonged to adults. If he could give her even a small taste of the carefree childhood she deserved, it would be worth any inconvenience. "I think we can manage that," he said gently. "Tomorrow, I'll show you round the ranch properly. There's a creek not far from here where the water runs clear and cool. Might be good place for a swimming hole." "I'd like that," Maggie said softly. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars grew brighter overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and another answered from across the valley. The sound might have frightened a city-bred child, but Maggie just listened with interest. "What kinds of animals live out here?" she asked. "Oh, all sorts: deer, elk, rabbits, prairie dogs, coyotes, like the ones you just heard. Sometimes wolves, though they usually stay up in the mountains. Bears, too, but they mostly mind their own business if you mind yours." "What about cattle? Aunt Millicent's letters mentioned you raised cattle." Ezekiel's expression darkened. "Used to lost most of my herd 3 winters ago. Haven't had the money to restock properly since then. That's part of why he trailed off, not wanting to mention his failed plan to find a wife who could help him rebuild his life. That's part of why you needed help," Maggie finished tactfully. "Well, like I said, I'm good with numbers. Maybe I can help you figure out how to get back on your feet." "Maybe you can," Ezekiel said, surprising himself by meaning it. The next morning, Maggie was up before dawn, already dressed and preparing breakfast when Ezekiel came downstairs. The smell of bacon and coffee filled the kitchen, and she had somehow managed to create fluffy pancakes from his meager supplies. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "I hope you don't mind that I got started early. I wanted to prove I meant what I said about earning my keep." "Maggie," Ezekiel said seriously, sitting down at the table, "you don't have to prove anything to me. You're not a hired hand. You're a family now." The word family seemed to catch her off guard. Her eyes grew bright and she turned back to the stove quickly. "Thank you," she said in a small voice. That's real nice to hear." After breakfast, Ezekiel gave her the grand tour of the ranch. He showed her the barn, which housed his 2 horses and a milk cow named Bessie. There were chicken coos, though they were mostly empty now, and a vegetable garden that had gone to weeds in his neglect. "This could be real productive again," Maggie said, surveying the ever-grown garden plot. "The soil looks rich. Do you have any seeds?" "Some," Ezekiel admitted. "Been meaning to plant, but between the ranch work and trying to keep the house running, well, that's what I'm here for now," Maggie said firmly. "We can get this garden back in shape, and I can tend it while you handle the other work." They walked down to the creek he had mentioned, a clear stream that wound through cottonwood trees. The water was indeed cool and inviting, and Maggie knelt down to splash some on her face. "It's beautiful here," she said, looking round at the peaceful scene. "So different from Philadelphia. Do you miss the city?" Ezekiel asked. Maggie considered this carefully. "I miss some things. The sounds of people and carriages and life happening all around. But I don't miss the crowded streets or the smell of too many folks living too close together. And I don't miss never seeing more than a little patch of sky between the buildings." Over the following days, Maggie settled into living in the ranch with remarkable ease. She took over the cooking entirely, and Ezekiel found himself looking forward to meals for the first time in years. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, organized his scattered papers, and began work on restoring the vegetable garden. But more than the domestic help, Maggie brought something else to the ranch life. Her presence filled the quiet spaces that had echoed with loneliness for so long. She hummed while she worked, asked countless questions about ranch life, and showed genuine interest in everything Ezekiel tried to teach her. One evening, about a week after her arrival, they were sitting on the porch after supper when Maggie brought up a subject that had been on both their minds. "Zeke," she said carefully, "what are you going to tell folks in town about me?" It was a fair question. Ezekiel had been wondering the same thing. He couldn't very well explain that he had ordered a mail-order bride and received a child instead. "What do you think we should tell them?" he asked. "Well," Maggie said thoughtfully, "I suppose we could say I'm your niece, asterisk. Come to live with you after my parents died. That's close enough to the truth. That's a good idea." Ezekiel agreed. "My brother's daughter, maybe he died in Theur, so folks wouldn't be able to check on the story. I can be Magnolia Thompson instead of Whitmore." Maggie added, "That way, if anyone ever asks about my aunt's death, there won't be any confusion." Ezekiel was struck again by how mature and thoughtful she was for her age. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, Maggie Thompson." She beamed at the use of her new name. "I like the sound of that." The first test of their story came the following Saturday when they went to town for supplies. Willow Creek was a small settlement with a general store, a saloon, a church, and not much else. Word traveled fast in sick. A small community, and Ezekiel knew that everyone would be curious about his unexpected companion. Sure enough, they had barely tied up the horses outside Morrison's general store when Bertha Morrison came, bustling out, her eyes fixed on Maggie with undisguised curiosity. "Well, Ezekiel Thompson," she exclaimed, "who is this lovely young lady?" "Bertha, I'd like you to meet my niece, Magnolia," Ezekiel said smoothly. "She's come to live with me after her parents passed." "Oh, you poor dear," Bertha accused, bending down to Maggie's level. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Butho, wonderful that you have your uncle to look after you." "Yes, ma'am," Maggie replied politely. "Uncle Ezekiel has been very kind." "And where did you come from, child?" "Philadelphia," Maggie answered. "It's quite different here, but I like it very much." Bertha peppered them with questions as they shopped, but Maggie handled herself with poise and gave answers that supported their story perfectly. By the time they left the store, Ezekiel was confident that their cover story would hold up to scrutiny. As the weeks passed, Maggie became a familiar sight around Willow Creek. She accompanied Ezekiel to church on Sundays, where she charmed the congregation with her sweet voice and respectful manner. The pastor, Reverend Hutchkins, took a particular interest in her education and offered to lend her books from his personal library. "The child is remarkably bright," he told Ezekiel after one service. "Have you given thought to her schooling?" It was another aspect of caring for Maggie that Ezekiel hadn't fully considered. The nearest school was in town, too far for daily travel from the ranch. "I've been thinking about it," Ezekiel said. "Maybe I could arrange for her to board in town during the school year." But when he mentioned this idea to Maggie, she looked stricken. "You want to send me away?" she asked, her voice small. "Not send you away," Ezekiel said quickly. "Just you need an education, Maggie. You're too smart not to have proper schooling." "I can learn from books," she said. Reverend Hutchkins said. "He'd lend me all I wanted, and you could teach me practical things. Please don't make me go live with strangers." The plea in her voice decided him. "All right," he said. "We'll figure out another way. Maybe the Reverend would be willing to tutor you a few times a week." Relief flooded Maggie's face. "Thank you, Zeke. I promise I'll study hard and not be any trouble." "You're no trouble, child," Ezekiel assured her. "You're the best thing that's happened to this ranch in years." And it was true. Under Maggie's influence, the ranch was beginning to come back to life. The vegetable garden was producing abundantly. The house stayed clean and welcoming, and Ezekiel found himself eating better than he had since Priscilla's death. But more than the practical improvements, Maggie had brought joy back into his life. One evening in late August, as they sat on porch watching the sunset, Maggie brought up a subject that surprised him. "Zeke," she said hesitantly, "do you ever think about getting married? I mean, for real this time." Ezekiel nearly choked on his coffee. "What brought that on?" Well, Maggie said carefully, I know you were lonely before I came. And I know you wanted a wife to help with the ranch and keep you company. I can help with the ranch work, but I can't. Well, I can't be a wife to you, Maggie. Ezekiel said gently, I don't need a wife anymore. I have you, and that's enough family for me. But what about when I grow up and get married myself someday? Maggie asked. You'll be alone again. It was a fair point, though. Ezekiel couldn't bear to think about Maggie leaving someday. In just a few short months, she had become so central to his life that he couldn't imagine the ranch without her. That's a long way off, he said finally. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I just want you to be happy, Maggie said seriously. You've been so good to me, and I want to make sure you're taken care of too. Ezekiel was touched by her concern. I am happy, Maggie, happier than I've been in years. You don't need to worry about me. As autumn approached, Ezekiel began to worry about the coming winter. He still didn't have enough cattle to generate significant income, and his savings were running low. He had been hoping that a wife would bring some resources to the marriage, but now he had an additional mouth to feed and no extra income. One evening, as he sat at the kitchen table going over his accounts, Maggie appeared at his elbow. The numbers don't look good, do they? She said, studying the ledger with a serious expression. How did you? Ezekiel began, then remembered her claim to be good with figures. No, they don't look too promising. May I? Maggie asked, reaching for the pencil. Ezekiel watched it in amazement as she quickly went through his calculations, checking his arithmetic and reorganizing the columns. You made a few errors here, she said, pointing to several entries. And you forget to account for the income from selling vegetables to Morrison's store. What income from selling vegetables? Well, we've got more produce than we can possibly eat or preserve, Maggie said. I asked Mrs. Morrison if she'd be interested in buying our surplus, and she said she'd pay good money for fresh vegetables, especially this late in the season when most gardens are played out. Ezekiel stared at her. You've been selling our vegetables. Just the extra, Maggie said quickly. That's all right. I've been saving the money to give to you, but I wanted it to be a surprise. She disappeared upstairs and returned with a small jar filled with coins and bills. When Ezekiel counted it, he was astonished to find nearly $20. Maggie, this is wonderful, he exclaimed, but you should have told me. I wanted to prove I could contribute more than just cooking and cleaning, she said. Mrs. Morrison says she'll buy all the winter squash and root vegetables we can spare, too. Looking at the corrected ledger with the vegetable income included, Ezekiel realized their situation wasn't as dire as he had thought. They would be able to make it through the winter comfortably. And if Maggie's business arrangement with the store continued, they might even be able to start rebuilding the cattle herd come spring. You're amazing, you know that, he told her. Maggie blushed with pleasure. I just want to do my part. Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling in late October. Ezekiel had worried about how Maggie would handle the isolation of a Montana winter, but she seemed to thrive on the quiet months. She spent her days reading books borrowed from Reverend Hutchkins, practicing her sewing skills, and helping Ezekiel with indoor projects like repairing TAC and maintaining tools. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and Ezekiel would tell her stories about the early days of a ranch, about his life with Priscilla and a Booth wild country before settlers arrived. Maggie was an excellent listener, asking thoughtful questions and showing genuine interest in his past. Tell me about your wife, she said one snowy evening. What was she like? Ezekiel was quiet for a moment, surprised to find that talking about Priscilla no longer brought the sharp pain it once had. She was kind, he said finally, and funny. She could find something to laugh about in any situation. She loved this place even when times were hard. Do you think she would have liked me? Maggie asked. Oh, she would have adored you, Ezekiel said without hesitation. She always wanted children. She would have spoiled you rotten. I would have liked her too, I think, Maggie said softly as Christmas approached. Ezekiel realized he wanted to make it special for Maggie. He had never paid much attention to the holidays since Priscilla's death, but the thought of giving this wonderful child a proper Christmas filled him with excitement. He made a secret trip to town and spent some of their carefully hoarded money on gifts. A new dress for Maggie, some hair ribbons, a set of books, and materials for her to make more sophisticated sewing projects. He even managed to find a small doll, though he worried she might think herself too old for such things. Maggie, meanwhile, was working on her own secret project. Ezekiel often found her quickly hiding something when he entered a room, and she had taken to shooing him out of the kitchen at odd hours. On Christmas morning, they exchanged gifts by the light of the fire. Maggie gasped with delight over the dress and books and surprised Ezekiel by hugging the doll tightly. "I haven't had a doll since I was very small," she admitted. "I thought I didn't want one anymore, but she's beautiful." Her gifts to him were even more touching. She had sewn him a new shirt from fabric she had somehow acquired embroidered with his initials, and neat careful stitches. She had also made him a pair of warm mittens and a matching scarf. But the most precious gift was a small wooden box she presented to him with obvious nervousness. "It's not much," she said as he opened it, "but I wanted to give you something really special." Inside the box was a photograph, a formal portrait of two of them that she had somehow arranged to have taken during one of their trips to town. They stood together in front of the photographer's painted backdrop, Ezekiel's hand on Maggie's shoulder, both of them smiling. At the bottom, in Maggie's careful handwriting, were the words, "The Thompson Family, Christmas 1887. Ezekiel felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Maggie, this is perfect. I wanted you to have something to remember this year by," she said. "There we became a family. I'll treasure it always," Ezekiel promised and meant every word. That winter proved to be one of the happiest periods of Ezekiel's life since Priscilla's death. Despite cold and isolation, the ranch felt alive again with Maggie's presence. She had a way of finding wonder in the smallest things. The patterns frost made on the windows, the way snow clung to pine branches, the tracks animals left in the yard. When spring finally arrived, it brought new challenges and opportunities. Ezekiel had been corresponding with cattle dealers, and had enough money saved from Maggie's vegetable sales to purchase a small herd. The prospect of having cattle on the ranch again filled him with excitement, but it also meant long days of hard work ahead. "I want to help with the cattle," Maggie announced one morning over breakfast. "Maggie, cattle work is dangerous," Ezekiel protested. "These aren't tame milk cows. Range cattle can be unpredictable." "Then teach me how to handle them properly," she said with determination. "I'm not afraid, and I'm stronger than I was when I first came here." It was true. Months of good food and outdoor work had filled out her small frame and put color in her cheeks. She was still small for her age, but she moved with confidence and seemed capable of far more than most 11-year-olds. Against his better judgment, Ezekiel began teaching her basic cattle handling. To his surprise, she showed a natural aptitude for working with the animals. She had a calm, steady presence that seemed to reassure even the most skittish cows, and she learned quickly how to anticipate their movements. "You've got a gift for this," he told her after watching her successfully separate a stubborn ear from the herd. "And animals just make sense to me," Maggie replied, patting the here's flank. "They're honest. If they're scared or angry or content, they show it plain. Not like people who sometimes say one thing and mean another." The observation struck Ezekiel as remarkably perceptive for someone so young. But then Maggie had always been wise beyond her years. As summer progressed, word of the Thompson Ranch's recovery began to spread through the territory. Ezekiel's small herd was healthy and growing. His vegetable garden was the envy of the county, and visitors often commented on how well-maintained everything looked. "You've got quite a place here, Thompson," remarked Judge Whitfield during a visit to assess property values for tax purposes. "And that niece of yours is a remarkable young lady. You're fortunate to have such capable family." "Yes, I am," Ezekiel agreed, watching Maggie expertly handle a fractious calf. "I don't know what I'd do without her." But their peaceful existence was threatened one hot July day when a stranger rode up to the ranch. He was a well-dressed man in his 40s with cold gray eyes and an air of authority. That immediately put Ezekiel on guard. "Mr. Thompson," Theman said, dismounting from a fine bay horse, "my name is Chester Whitmore. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Ezekiel's blood ran cold. "Whitmore, the same name as Maggie's aunt. I'm not sure what you mean." "I think you do." Whitmore's smile was thin and unpleasant. My late sister had a daughter, Magnolia. I believe her name was. The child disappeared from Philadelphia after Millis died, and I've been tracking her ever since. Maggie is my niece, Ezekiel said carefully. She came to live with me after her parents died. Her parents? Whitmore laughed harshly. Her parents died of fever, and she went to live with my sister. When Millicent passed, that child became my ward. She ran away before I could collect her, but I found her now. Ezekiel's mind raced. If Fisman was truly Maggie's uncle by blood, he might have legal claim to her. What do you want with her? What's rightful of mine? Whitmore replied, the child has an inheritance coming to her. Her parents left a small estate that I've been managing. She needs to come back to Philadelphia with me to claim it. She's happy here, Ezekiel said firmly. She's been well cared for, and she's thriving. I'm sure she is, but the law is the law, Mr. Thompson. As her closest living relative, I have the right to determine her future. At that moment, Maggie appeared around the corner of the barn, leading Bessie the cow back from pasture. When she saw Whitmore, she stopped dead in her tracks, her face going white. Hello, Magnolia, Whitmore said smoothly. It's time to come home. No, Maggie said quietly, but her voice carried clearly across the yard. This is my home now. Don't be difficult, child. You're coming with me whether you like it or not. Ezekiel stepped protectively in front of Maggie. She's not going anywhere. If you have a legal claim, you'll need to prove it through proper channels. I have all the documentation I need, Whitmore said, patting his coat pocket. Birth certificates, death certificates, proof of my guardianship. The local sheriff will back me up. Then we'll see what Sheriff Morrison has to say about it, Ezekiel replied, though his heart was sinking. If Whitmore really was Maggie's blood relative with proper papers, there might be little Ezekiel could do to stop him. Zeke, Maggie whispered, tugging on his sleeve. Can I talk to you alone? Ezekiel nodded to Whitmore. Wait here. We'll be right back. He led Maggie into the barn, where she immediately burst into tears. He's fleeing, she sobbed. He's my uncle, but he's not a good man. He gambled away most of his own money, and he wants mine. Aunt Millicent warned me about him before she died. She said he'd come looking for me if he ever found out about my inheritance. What inheritance? Ezekiel asked gently. Ma and P had some money saved, and they owned the boarding house free and clear. When they died, it all went to me in trust until I turned 18. But Uncle Chester has been trying to get control of it for months. That's part of why Aunt Millicent wanted to send me away to keep me safe from him. Ezekiel's jaw tightened with anger. He wants to use you to get your money. Yes, Dot, and once he has legal control of me, he can do whatever he wants with my inheritance. Aunt Millicent said he might even try to marry me off young to one of his gambling friends. To pay his debts. The thought made Ezekiel sick. That's not going to happen, Maggie. I won't let him take you. But what if the law is on his side? What if I have to go? Ezekiel was quiet for a long moment, thinking furiously. Then an idea began to form in his mind, desperate, but possibly their only chance. Maggie, he said carefully, how would you feel about me adopting you legally, making you my daughter in the eyes of the law, not just in our hearts? Maggie's eyes widened. Could you do that? I think so. Judge Whitfield owes me a favor, and he's seen how well you've been cared for here. If we can prove that Whitmore abandoned his responsibility to you, and that you're better off, as my adopted daughter, I'd like that more than anything, Maggie said fiercely. You're more of a father to me than anyone's ever been. Then we'll fight this, Ezekiel promised. But it might mean a long legal battle, and there's no guarantee we'll win. I don't care how long it takes, Maggie said. This is where I belong. They returned to the yard to find Whitmore pacing impatiently beside his horse. Have you come to your senses? He asked coldly. Actually, yes, Ezekiel replied. I'm going to fight your claim in court. I intend to adopt Magnolia legally and give her the choice of where she wants to live. Whitmore's face darkened. You can't do that. I'm her blood relative. Blood doesn't make family, Ezekiel said firmly. Love and care do. And this child has been loved and cared for here in ways she never was in Philadelphia. You'll regret this, Thompson, Whitmore snarled, mounting his horse. I'll be back with the sheriff, and I'll take that child by force if necessary. You try that and you'll answer to me, Ezekiel replied. his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. Whitmore wheeled his horse around and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. The next few weeks were tense and difficult. Whitmore made good on his threat to return with legal backing, but Sheriff Morrison was a fair man who insisted on a proper hearing before any child would be removed from a home where she was clearly thriving. Judge Whitfield agreed to hear the case, and Ezekiel hired the best lawyer he could afford with their savings. The hearing was set for late August, giving them time to prepare their case. The entire town of Willow Creek seemed to rally round Maggie and Ezekiel. Neighbors testified to Maggie's shabbiness and good health. Reverend Hutchkins spoke about her character and intelligence, and even Mrs. Morrison from the general store testified about Maggie's industrious nature and contribution to the community. Whitmore, meanwhile, could produce little evidence of his fitness as a guardian beyond his blood relationship and his financial claims. When questioned closely, his true motives became clear to everyone in the courtroom. "Your Honor," Ezekiel's lawyer argued, "this man has shown no interest in the child's welfare for over a year. He only appeared when he learned she had an inheritance he could control. Thompson, on the other hand, has provided Magnolia with a loving home, excellent care, and the chance to grow up in a stable environment." In the end, Judge Whitfield's decision was swift and decisive. "It's clear to this court that the child's best interests lie with Mr. Thompson," he declared. "The adoption petition is granted. Magnolia Thompson, you are hereby legally the daughter of Ezekiel Thompson, with all the rights and protections that entails." Maggie burst into tears of joy and threw her arms around Ezekiel's neck. The courtroom erupted in applause, and even the stern judge was seen wiping high sighs. Whitmore stormed out of the courtroom, vowing to appeal, but his lawyer quietly advised him that no eager court would overturn such a clear-cut decision. That evening, back at the ranch, Ezekiel and Maggie sat on their favorite spot on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "So," Ezekiel said softly, "how does it feel to be officially Magnolia Thompson?" "It feels like coming home," Maggie replied, leaning against his shoulder, "even though I've been home all along." "Yes, you have," Ezekiel agreed, putting his arm around her. "From the moment you stepped off that train, you were family. Do you ever regret it?" Maggie asked, "Taking me in instead of sending me back when you realized the mistake." Ezekiel was quiet for a long moment, thinking about all the changes the past year had brought. His ranch was thriving again. His house was filled with laughter and life, and he had discovered a love deeper than he had ever imagined possible. The love of a father for his daughter. "Never," he said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Maggie Thompson, you saved me," Maggie said quietly. "In more ways than you know." "We saved each other," Ezekiel corrected. "That's what families do." As the stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, father and daughter sat together in comfortable silence, both grateful for the unexpected journey that had brought them together. The future stretched ahead of them, full of promise and possibility, and they would face it together. A family forged not by blood, but by something far stronger: love, trust, and the unbreakable bonds of the heart. Years later, when Maggie was grown and had children of her own playing in the same yard where she had once tended vegetables, she would tell them the story of how she came to be part of the Thompson family. She would tell them about the brave man who could have sent a frightened little girl away, but chose instead to open his heart and his home. She would tell them about second chances and unexpected blessings, about how sometimes the best things in life come disguised as problems. But most of all, she would tell them about love. The kind of love that sees beyond circumstances to the heart of a person. The kind of love that builds families out of strangers. And the kind of love that lasts forever. The Thompson Ranch prospered for generations, passed down through the family that began with a simple mistake, and a man brave enough to embrace the unexpected. And if you were to visit that place today, they say you can still feel the love that built it. Still sense the joy of a little girl who found her home and a lonely man who found his purpose. Sometimes the best answers to our prayers come in forms we never expected. Sometimes what we think we want is nothing compared to what we actually need. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, a 10-year-old girl steps off a train and changes everything forever. Now that you've watched the full story, we'd really appreciate it if you could rate it out of 10 in the comments. Your thoughts help us improve and ensure we're bringing you the kind of storytelling you truly enjoy.